Now on to Chapter 10 of Robert Anton Wilson's Prometheus Rising. How to brainwash friends and robotize people. There is no government, no industrial military complex, no economic style, no mass media that can ever reduce us to puppets and robots as thoroughly as the biological and environmental dictatorships have. F.M. Esfandiari, Upwingers. As noted earlier, when the biosurvival circuit flashes danger, all other mental activity ceases. There is no time on the biosurvival circuit. Reflexes act without emotional ego. Rational mind or adult personality participating, I just found myself doing it. All the martial arts, judo, aikido, kung fu, etc., are re-imprinting techniques for the biosurvival circuit. They are intended to ensure that what happens mechanically without thought, Budo Mushin, Mushin, really does serve biosurvival. Since the reflexes imprinted accidentally on this circuit are not that dependable. The mechanical nature of the biosurvival circuit is of key importance in the brainwashing to create a new imprint, reduce the victim to an infantile state, in other words, first circuit vulnerability. As pointed out in the last chapter, any army begins this process with the draft notice, which informs the subject that his body no longer belongs to him, but to the government. The SL army, seeking quicker brain change, began conversion of Patty into Tanya by taking her at gunpoint, but the message is the same. We can do what we want with your body from now on. First circuit biosurvival instincts thus become hooked into obeying those who have this awesome power, just as the infant learns to hook its biosurvival circuitry to the parental figures. Patty's ride in the trunk of a car after being taken at gunpoint is a classic rebirth ritual. The trunk is even womb-like in its contours. When the trunk opened, she was reborn into a new reality tunnel, that of her captors. Similarly, where the earliest forms of Masonic initiation survive and have not been diluted, note the Adeptus Major ritual in the Complete Golden Dawn System of Magic by Israel Regardi, Falcon Press, 1983, the candidate is thrown into a well and then raised as a newborn Freemason. Total submersion, the form of baptism preferred by Protestant fundamentalists, imitates this, but without the real anxiety that made traditional masonry and the SLA so effective as brain change agents. All brainwashers empirically know, without, in most cases, ever having read Leary's 8-circuit model of the brain, that the oral biosurvival circuits seek bonding with a mothering figure. To increase panic and imprint vulnerability, then the subject, after being seized by the brainwashers, U.S. or SL Army, secret police, or whoever they may be in the given case, is isolated from all those to whom bonding had previously been established. The draftee is sent to boot camp and sees no loved ones, wife, girlfriend, parents, etc., for a number of weeks or months. The political prisoner is thrown into a dungeon. Patty Hearst was locked in a closet as soon as she was rebirthed out of the trunk of the car. Experiments in isolation by the U.S. Marine Corps, Dr. John Lilly, and others and the records of the shipwrecked sailors, as summarized by Lilly in Simulations of God, show that only a few hours of pure isolation may be necessary before hallucinations begin. These hallucinations, like those of psychedelic drugs, indicate the breakdown of previous imprints and onset of vulnerability to new imprints. The need to bond the biosurvival circuit to somebody or something is indicated by the giraffe who imprinted on the hunter's jeep as a mother substitute. Similarly, children without siblings, especially those in remote rural areas, often invent imaginary playmates, which can become real enough to frighten the parents into suspecting the onset of psychosis. Dr. Lilly records as sailors and explorers in isolation show such guides, companions, or holy guardian angels reappear quickly even in adulthood when normal social contact is removed. They also come promptly to those undergoing the mysterious state called near-death or out-of-body experience, for example, when the heart stops on the operating table. The first human being who appears to the subject after this isolation can easily become bonded as the mother substitute, or next best as a father substitute. This explains why people held prisoner by terrorists, in other words, or hijacked planes basically, often develop a paradoxical sympathy for those who are threatening to kill them. It also explains why the draftee begins to look on his kidnappers as protectors as well as captors, and why the brainwashed victim begins to please, gratify, and eventually respect the brainwasher. In all cases, since biosurvival circuit is key to nourishment, those who bring food become possible subjects for bonding. The political prisoner, the draftee, the subject kidnapped by the terrorist all move somewhat closer to identification bonding with their captors as they are fed regularly. Again, this is imitated crudely by various religions without the terror that creates true imprint vulnerability by following baptism, rebirth rituals, and communal meal or Holy Eucharist. Adaptations of these principles can be applied even to those who walk into the brainwashing environment voluntarily at first, as in People's Temple, the Manson family, and similar organizations. The first step, once the victim is inside the territory commune, is to begin isolation by cutting off all communication with the outer world and its conflicting reality tunnels. Meanwhile, a parental protective atmosphere is quickly created, sometimes called love bombing, and food is provided. Whether the subject has entered voluntarily into these communes or has been kidnapped or arrested, as in police states, the next stage is to break down the Second Circuit emotional territorial imprints. That means that the subject continues to be fed, maintaining First Circuit oral dependence, while the Second Circuit ego is attacked in every manner possible. A point-by-point comparison of the techniques of a Synanon gamer and U.S. Army drill sergeant, for instance, would show astonishing similarities, since the basic message is dozens and dozens of variations on "you are all wrong, we are all right." It is extremely unlikely that someone as wrong as you will ever become right, ever. But we will try to teach you. The anal vocabulary of territorial status is, of course, employed extensively. The ideal subject may almost forget his or her name and become conditioned to answering to "you asshole, come here." The boards. The sense of bottom dog helplessness can be escalated by periodic doses of real terror. One of Charlie Manson's famous sayings was, "Fear is the great teacher," and every brainwasher would agree ardently. In communist countries, as dramatized on Costa Grava's fine and factual film, The Confession, a favorite trick is to take the subject out of his cell, march him into a courtyard, and place a noose around his neck and convince him he is about to be hanged. The relief when it turns out to be a bluff creates an ideal imprint vulnerability. A variation in my novel Illuminatus has the victim persuaded he has been poisoned, dumped into a coffin, and the lid slammed upon him. Those who have been initiated as Mark Master Freemasons will recognize at once that the same technique is the mark that you will carry to your grave. Among the Zuni Indians, the male adolescent is kidnapped by masked demons who carry him away from the tribe, away from mother and other imprinted security figures. He is dragged out into the desert and threatened with whips. Then the masks come off, revealing his maternal uncles, and in that moment of imprint vulnerability, the tribal secrets, the local reality tunnel, are explained in a way that leave an indelible mark on his consciousness. Similar rites of passage are found in all tribes, few as cleverly designed as this one. Symbolic and diluted versions survive in bar mitzvahs and confirmation ceremonies in our local megatribes. The rebirthing of the Second Circuit is relatively complete when the bottom dog subject begins to seek sincerely, not hypocritically, to win approval of the top dogs. This is, of course, only begins as play acting. The skilled brainwasher knows that and does not really object. Think about Burning Man. With subtle reinforcement, the play acting becomes more and more genuine. Edmund Burke noted long ago, and every method actor knows, that you cannot make 3 dramatic gestures of rage in political speech without beginning to feel some real rage. You cannot make 3 gestures of submission without beginning to feel really submissive. This is the psychology of the company man, who truly identifies with his employer after years of obedience. The draftee first tries to please the sergeant to avoid further humiliation and punishment. Gradually, he genuinely wants to please the sergeant, i.e. prove he is not all wrong and is good enough to be a soldier. Patty Hertz undoubtedly pretended to accept the SLA reality tunnel at first and gradually found the presence becoming more and more real. This process is accelerated by a system of occasional rewards as the subject more and more emits, as the behaviorist would say, the desired behaviors, since some people are more complicated than behaviorists know. It is necessary to vary this with occasional punishments for insincerity or backsliding, think like Scientology, so that the subject learns that after the initial stage, it is not enough to pretend to accept the new reality tunnel. To escape further humiliation, ego loss, terrorism, and permanent bottom dog status, one must begin to accept it sincerely. After the imprint of helplessness has been made, this conditioning and learning will proceed fairly smoothly, especially if the chief brainwasher's confederates reinforce it with encouragement, support, and general reward for sincere submission, and contempt, disappointment, and general rejection for insincerity or backsliding. Re-imprinting the third semantic circuit can now follow easily. The human brain is capable of mastering any simple system if sufficiently motivated. Some people can even play Beethoven's-like piano music, although to me this is as miraculous as any feat alleged by psychic researchers. People can learn French, Hindustani, differential calculus, Swahili, etc. ad infinitum if motivated. When the first circuit security when the first circuit security needs have been re-imprinted and second security egos have been hooked to mastering a new semantic reality tunnel, that tunnel will be imprinted. At this point, certain amount of arbitrary nonsense is of great value. That is, the new reality tunnel or symbolic system like the old one should contain pitfalls, gross violations of previous reality tunnels, and common sense, so that the subject can be accused of backsliding, being all wrong after all, and thereby incited to try harder to become part of the new reality tunnel. Thus, Jehovah's Witnesses may not accept blood transfusions, even if their life depends on it. Harder still, since all mammals have an instinct to protect their young, they must reject blood transfusions for their children, even if the children die of this neglect. A Roman Catholic woman may not be divorced even if her husband comes home drunk every night, beats her up, and gives her VD. In the U.S. Marines, a recruit who commits the hideous crime of calling a rifle a gun must walk around the base with his rifle in one hand and his penis in the other, reciting to everyone he meets, "This is my rifle, this is my gun, this is for fighting, this is for fun." Theosophists were once required to believe that there's a hole at the North Pole going down to the center of the Earth. Manson required his followers to believe the hole was in the Mojave Desert. Nazi Party members were asked to believe that the lion is an Aryan animal and the rabbit non-Aryan, etc. The neurological and sociological function of such nonsense, which makes the rationalist gasp in shock, is to sharply segregate those within the new reality tunnel from the outside, making this group solidarity, group reinforcement, and strong sense of alienation and discomfort on rare occasions it is necessary to talk at all with those outside the brainwasher semantic system. The group must ensure, of course, that this alienation is experienced as superiority. Those who are outside the reality tunnel must be perceived as all wrong, just as the subject was before being brainwashed. Drugs can be and have been used to fine-tune these processes, but the general neurological principles are powerful enough that it is unlikely that many famous cases of brainwashing were accomplished as above described, without any drugs at all, kind of like the flat Earth stuff. The American soldiers who confessed to war crimes, which they evidently had not committed, the loyalist communists who confessed to Trotskyite conspiracies, which seemingly never existed. It takes very few weeks for most armies without drugs to convert a civilian into a soldier, even though the two species are as different from Roman Catholics to Shintoists. In one of my immortal novels, I describe a religious cult called Loonies, founded by one Neon Balloon, in which members pray in pig Latin while standing on one leg like storks. This is considered satire, but any would-be messiah who understands the above principles could create such a cult easily, and the members would soon have quite sincere sense of superiority to those outside that reality tunnel. Cults and outlaw terrorists generally follow the above procedures and further rewire of the fourth sociosexual circuit. Governments usually leave that circuit alone since government agents are largely puritanical, authoritarian, and afraid to get involved with all that at all with raw eros. It is no secret that the most powerful secret society of the Middle Ages, the Knights Templar, forced recruits to participate in both blasphemy and sodomy. Just as the deliberate nonsense of all cultish Third Circuit semantics isolates the group from the rest of society, this initiation separated the Templars from the rest of Christendom. The alienation could easily be conditioned into a sense of superiority. The Mau Maus in Kenya also insisted on one act of homosexuality to break the new members' previous conditioning towards heterosexuality and monogamy. Other cults, some quite well known, attempt to repress sexuality entirely, another way of breaking the statistically normal imprinting of the Fourth Circuit. The Manson family insisted on what might be called oxymoronically compulsory free love. The army serves normal amative bonds and casts the subject into a world where compulsory celibacy alternates with whorehouse adventures and quite often the rape of enemy women, with homosexuality as an ever present hidden option. A current American guru, DeFree John, imprints his subjects for lifelong monogamy, almost like the outside U.S. culture, but is indifferent as to whether these pairings are heterosexual or homosexual. Whatever variation the cult leader may choose, what makes for successful separate reality is that it must be in some respect outlandishly different from that of the major society. Again, we're just going back to burn culture. The easiest way to get brainwashed is to be born. All of the above principles then immediately go into action, a process which social psychologists euphemistically call socialization. The biosurvival circuit automatically hooks onto our bonds, the most appropriate mother or mothering object. The emotional territorial circuit looks for a role or ego identification in the family or tribe. The semantic circuit learns to imitate and then use the local reality grids, symbol systems. The sociosexual circuit is imprinted by whatever mating experience are initially available at puberty. The subjects may not come out of this process ready to murder women and children like the graduate of boot camp, or even willing to believe that Charlie Manson was both Jesus and Satan simultaneously, or willing to spout new left slogans while robbing banks. The subjects come out of normal socialization depending on where and when they were born as Eskimo totemists, Muslim fundamentalists, Roman Catholics, Marxist-Leninists, Nazis, Methodists, Republicans, Oxford-educated agnostics, snake worshippers, Ku Kluxers, mafiosos, Unitarians, IRA-ists, PLO-ists, Orthodox Jews, hard-shell Baptists, etc., etc. The universe, or existence, is obviously large enough and complex enough, and the ego self-centered enough that all these reality tunnels are capable of making sense, to some degree, to those imprinted, conditioned to accept them. It is also obvious that most of these reality tunnels contain elements so absurd that everybody not imprinted/conditioned by them looks at them with astonishment and dismay, wondering, how can a rational person or peoples believe such rubbish? What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. Whether you are living in a Christian reality tunnel, a Mansonoid reality tunnel, an immortalist reality tunnel, a vegetarian reality tunnel, a rationalist reality tunnel, everyone has the only true religion. The only true religion. Either earlier, we quoted some words from Persinger and Lafreniere. Yeah. We as a species exist in a world in which a myriad of, starting that over, we as a species exist in a world in which exist a myriad of data points. Upon these matrices of points, we superimpose a structure and the world makes sense to us. The pattern of the structure originates within our biological and sociological properties. It is to be hoped that this makes more sense to the reader now than it did at the beginning of our inquiry. The function of the domesticated primate brain, insofar as we have described it up to this point, and leaving out the higher, newer circuits, is to serve as an organ of adaptation, in Freud's phrase. Specifically, the oldest, most primitive, most mechanical centers serve simple biosurvival. The more recent, 500 million-year-old roughly, emotional territorial centers serve to maintain pack identity, habitat space, and hierarchy. The distinctly hominid semantic circuit, 100,000-year-old, makes maps and models reality tunnels, which we tend to confuse with reality itself, and worse yet, with all of reality. The 30,000-year-old moral social circuit creates the domesticated adult personality or parent role or superego. Now, obviously, the third semantic circuit works with and for these other antique circuits. The maps and models it makes are tools of adaptation, and what they adapt us to is social roles in domesticated primate society. Thus, A Midwestern Methodist is not misusing his brain as Arthur Koestler thinks in his constructing a Midwestern Methodist tunnel reality. That is precisely what his brain is for, to adapt him to the Midwestern Methodist tribal system, to impose the structure of Midwestern Methodist ideology upon the myriad of data points he encounters in his lifetime. The Chinese Maoist, the Iranian Muslim, the New York feminist, the Marin County hedonist, etc., each has a similar, equally arbitrary, equally complex reality tunnel. Each tunnel is also equally absurd when seen from the outside. The problems of the modern world arise from the fact that these reality tunnels are no longer isolated from each other. Throughout most of history, human history, and up to 100 years ago, up to 20 years ago in some parts of the world, a man or woman could lead their entire life snugly within the cocoon of the local reality tunnel. Today, we all constantly collide with persons living in wildly different reality tunnels. This creates a great deal of hostility in the more ignorant, vast amounts of metaphysical and ethical confusion in a more sophisticated and growing disorientation for all, a situation known as our crisis of values. The average person is a deluge of contradictory and conflicting reality tunnels impinging on him or her with little training in either cultural or neurological relativism. Speed of travel has increased by a factor of 1,000 since 1900, and speed of communication by a factor of 10 million, according to J.R. Platt. The deluge is accelerating and intensifying. One symptom is that the TV guide has been taken over by a band of terrified conservatives who cannot understand and can only dread this downpour of alien signals instead of being merely a guide to what is on the TV. TV guide has become a continuous wail that the tube's tunnel reality is wider, stranger, and more varied than the narrow tunnel vision of the small town wasp. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, if you're not familiar with the term. There has also arisen a profession of deprogrammers, so-called. These neurotechnicians who will, for a fee, kidnap a child or even child over 21 who has wandered off, departed the parental reality tunnel, and been brainwashed into competing reality tunnel of some new, not established, not acceptable yet cult. This is known as restoring the victim to normalcy. Though I don't want to go from Quebec to being a normie. That's silly. It is all hypocrisy and neurological ignorance, of course. The deprogrammers are actually reprogrammers. The parental tunnel, reality tunnel, is as arbitrary and to an outsider as bizarre as that of any cult. A special system of tricky semantics allow most people in some courts to ignore these facts. Just imagine what would happen if a wayward child of Methodist parents had wandered into the Roman Catholic Church, say, and the parents attempted to have the child coercively reprogrammed into Methodism, or if the child had joined the U.S. Army like Callie, and the parents kidnapped him and tried to reprogram him into civilian reality tunnels. The problems will not go away, and the abrasions they cause as various brainwashed robots continue to collide with each other will accelerate. Speed of travel and of communication are still continuing to accelerate. Fortunately, higher circuits are forming in the human brain and offer broader vistas than the narrow tunnel visions of the antique circuits. That is the topic of our concluding chapters. Since everybody prefers one circuit over the other, there are people in each society who are easily recognizable as narcissists, first circuit robots, emotionalists, second circuit robots, rationalists, third circuit robots, and moralists, fourth circuit robots. Rationalist robots, like the other robots, may be totally mechanized and may have some slight flexibility or freedom built into their circuitry. The totally robotized make up the vast horde of fundamentalist wing of the materialist church and the other true believers of the scientific paradigms of 1968, 1958, 1948, or whenever their nervous systems stopped taking new imprints. These are the people who are perpetually frightened and dismayed by the large portion of human behavior mediated through Circuit 2 mammalian politics. They think that because this territorially emotional patriotic behavior is rational, it should not exist. They accept Darwin as dogma, but are nervous about Darwinism because it accepts mammalian politics as an evolutionary strategy that has worked thus far, and are repulsed by the data of ethology, genetics, and sociobiology. They don't like the rest of the human race much, but it is not guided by their favorite circuit, and they are usually unaware that the rest of the human race does not much like them. The rationalist robots are also very uncomfortable with the newer circuits, and some of them spend most of their lives writing articles and books devoted to proving that the newer circuits do not exist, and that all scientists who have regarded the behavior of the newer circuits are liars, fools, burglars, charlatans, or some manner of damned heretics. Like the emotional robot, the moralistic robot, the narcissist robot, etc., the rationalist robot cannot be argued out of his narrow reality tunnel. We can only emphasize one more time that each and every reality tunnel created by a domesticated primate brain is a finite cross section of that brain's personal history. And each such finite reality tunnel is as personalized as the music of Bach or Beethoven, the paintings of Rembrandt or Picasso, the novels of Joyce or Raymond Chandler, the comedy of the Three Stooges or Monty Python, the religious Roman Catholic or Zen Buddhism, the politics of libertarianism or the IRA, the architecture of St. Peter's or Disneyland. And each of these artworks seem like reality to the people who have created them and live in them. Rationalism is just another such group artwork, a little less tolerant than most, a little more useful to technologists than any other, a little stupid when it can no longer transcend to the last paradigm it has created. The totally robotized rationalist, the one whose nervous system has stopped growing entirely, can be recognized by two signs. He or she is constantly trying to prove that much of the daily experience of the rest of humanity is delusion, hallucination, group hallucination, mass hallucination, mere coincidence, sheer coincidence, or sloppy research. And he or she never thinks that any of his or her own experiences would fit into any of those categories. Exercises. 1. Become a pious Roman Catholic. Explain in 3 pages why the Church is still infallible and holy despite popes like Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope, Pius the 12th ally of Hitler, etc. 2. For those of you who remember my lie, become Lieutenant Callie. Say aloud and really feel and believe the Army comes first. I am for the Army all the way. If you don't remember, try Jerry Falwell. Say aloud and really feel and believe. Help us fight moral decay. Send your checks in today. 3. Refute this whole book. Demonstrate that everybody else has been brainwashed but you, and your mother, father, has the one real objective view of the universe. Accept this book, if not in whole, at least in general outlines. Assume you have been brainwashed. Try to learn as much from every human you meet about their separate reality tunnel and see how much of it you can use to make your reality tunnel bigger and more inclusive. In other words, learn to listen. 5. James Joyce said, never let boring... Yeah. James Joyce said he never met a boring human being. Try to explain this. Try to get into the Joycean headspace, where everybody is a separate reality island full of mystery and surprise. In other words, learn to observe. 6. Read Aldous Huxley's The Genius and the Goddess. Note how the Circuit 3 scientific genius reverts to Circuit 1 helpless infant when his wife leaves him. 7. After experimenting with Nazi reality tunnel, the Catholic reality tunnel, etc., re-enter your normal reality tunnel. Does it still seem totally objective, or do you begin to recognize how much of it is your own software and hardware running programs? 8. Finally, explore the tunnel-busting reality of Christopher S. Hyatt's book titled Undoing Yourself with Energized Meditation and Other Devices. What reality tunnel is he selling, and how sincere is he about his writing? Also, do you think he has read my work and I his? Or is this last statement a gimmick of the publishers played on 2 innocent authors and the trusting public? Or even worse, did I write his book, or could it be that we are one and the same? See you next time. And